My name is Victoria Mitchell, and at 32, I thought I had finally escaped the suffocating weight of being the family's invisible workhorse. I had clawed my way from working double shifts as an emergency room nurse to building my own healthcare consulting firm, something I created with my own two hands, my own sleepless nights, my own relentless determination. I had money in the bank, a beautiful condo in downtown Portland, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. But last Tuesday evening, when crushing chest pain sent me to the floor of my parents' living room, gasping for air and begging them to call for help, my mother looked down at me with cold, dismissive eyes and said the words that would change everything. "You're being dramatic, Victoria. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You always do this for attention." My father nodded in agreement, arms crossed, as I clutched my chest feeling like an elephant was sitting on my ribcage. They refused to call 911. They actually refused. What they didn't know was that their choice that night would cost them everything they had been planning to take from me, and I had already made sure of it weeks before. Stick around because what happened next will show you exactly how their greed and neglect backfired in ways they never saw coming. Growing up in our cookie-cutter ranch house in Beaverton felt like living in two completely different worlds that somehow shared the same address. I was the eldest child, the responsible one, the one who was supposed to figure everything out on her own without making a fuss. My younger brother Kevin was the golden child, the one my parents poured their hopes, dreams, and most importantly their money into. From the time he was in middle school, my parents enrolled him in an expensive private academy across town, St. Augustine Prep, where tuition ran about $15,000 a year. They bragged to neighbors about his potential, showing off his mediocre report cards like they were acceptance letters to Harvard. Meanwhile, I rode the public bus to Beaverton High School every morning. Carrying a backpack stuffed with textbooks, I purchased myself from the used book sale, because my parents said the school-provided ones were good enough, and I should learn to make do with what I had. Kevin got everything handed to him on a silver platter, and I watched it happen year after year. When he turned 16, my parents surprised him with a used but still impressive Toyota Tacoma truck, forest green with leather seats, parked in our driveway with a giant red bow on the hood. I remember standing at the window watching him jump up and down with excitement while my parents hugged him, their faces glowing with pride. I had turned 16 2 years earlier and received a card with $20 in it and a pat on the shoulder. No car. No party. Just an expectation that I would continue getting myself to school, to my part-time job at the local grocery store, and anywhere else I needed to go on my own 2 feet, or by begging rides from friends. They told me that Kevin needed the truck because he had football practice, and it was too far to expect him to find rides. I had been managing just fine for years, so clearly I didn't need the help. The financial favoritism went beyond just transportation. My parents funded Kevin's summer baseball camps every year, expensive week-long programs that cost upwards of $1,200 each. They paid for his guitar lessons, his new gaming computer, his ski trips with friends to Mount Hood. I can still remember the weekend they sent him and 3 of his buddies to a resort for a ski weekend, covering lift tickets, equipment rentals, and lodging without batting an eye. That same month, I asked if they could help me pay for my AP exam fees, just $89, and my mother sighed heavily and told me that money doesn't grow on trees, and I needed to be more financially responsible. I was 17 years old working 20 hours a week at a grocery store while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and I needed to be more responsible. Kevin wasn't just spoiled by the money they spent on him. He actively took from me without consequence. When I was 15, I had saved up nearly $300 from babysitting kids in the neighborhood every weekend. I kept it in an envelope hidden in my desk drawer, dreaming about buying a used laptop, so I could stop having to go to the library every time I needed to type a paper. One afternoon I came home to find the envelope gone, and Kevin sporting brand new basketball shoes that cost right around $300. When I confronted him, he just shrugged and said he borrowed it and would pay me back when he got his allowance. He never did. When I told my parents, they looked at me like I was causing unnecessary drama. "Your brother needed new shoes for the season," my father said flatly. "You can always make more money babysitting. Family shares with family." That was their answer. Family shares, but only in one direction, apparently. The pattern continued through high school. Kevin failed 2 classes his junior year, but my parents hired him an expensive tutor and took him out to celebrate when he barely scraped by with D's after the tutor basically did his homework for him. I graduated with honors, earned a partial scholarship to Portland State University, and my parents came to my graduation ceremony, but left early because Kevin had a baseball game. There was no party for me, no celebration dinner, just a quick hug and a reminder to make sure I figured out how to pay for the rest of my college expenses since the scholarship only covered about 60% of tuition. They made it clear that Kevin's education fund was already stretched thin with his private school costs, and there was nothing left over for me. The implication was obvious. I was on my own, and I had better not complain about it. The worst betrayal came during the spring of my senior year in high school. I had worked incredibly hard to earn a spot in a competitive nursing program at Oregon Health and Science University. It was my dream, the thing I had been working toward through years of science classes and volunteer hours at the local hospital. The program offered a pathway to becoming an RN with clinical experience built right in, and acceptance was extremely competitive. Out of hundreds of applicants, I was one of just 40 students chosen. I was over the moon. The program required an upfront deposit of $5,000 to secure my spot, due within 2 weeks of acceptance. I had saved about half of that from my job, and I went to my parents with a printed breakdown showing them exactly how much I had, how much I needed, and a plan for paying them back within a year through a payment schedule I had already mapped out. My father listened to my pitch, looked over my papers, and then shook his head. That same week, we got hit with an unexpected expense. My mother had been in a minor car accident, nothing serious, but the insurance deductible was $4,500, and they needed to pay it immediately to get the car repaired. "We don't have extra money lying around right now, Victoria," my father said, sliding my carefully prepared documents back across the kitchen table. "You're going to have to figure something else out." I felt my stomach drop. I asked if there was any way, maybe a payment plan with the hospital, or pushing back some other expense. My mother cut me off. "Kevin's tuition payment is due next month, and we can't afford to be late on that. You'll find another path. There are community colleges. You're smart. You'll figure it out." I will never forget standing in that kitchen feeling my entire future crumbling, while they calmly discussed taking Kevin to look at new baseball bats that weekend, because his old one had a small crack. I gave up my spot in the nursing program. I let my dream school go and enrolled instead at Portland State University with my partial scholarship, planning to work my way through a general nursing degree that would take longer and offer fewer opportunities. The betrayal burned deeper than anything I had experienced before. 1 week after I withdrew from the OHSU program, I came home to find a brand new mountain bike in the garage, top of the line, easily worth $1,500. It was for Kevin. "Early birthday present," my mother said cheerfully when she saw me staring at it. "He's been wanting to get into mountain biking with his friends." That moment crystallized everything for me. I stopped expecting anything from them. I stopped hoping they would see me, acknowledge my effort, or treat me with even a fraction of the attention they gave Kevin. I opened a separate bank account that only I had access to, and I funneled every single dollar I earned into it. I worked extra shifts at the grocery store, picked up tutoring gigs, and even cleaned houses on weekends. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved nearly $8,000, money they knew nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nothing about and could never touch. I moved out the week after graduation, renting a tiny studio apartment near campus with 2 roommates. My parents barely noticed I was gone. They were too busy planning Kevin's graduation party, a massive backyard barbecue with catered food that cost them well over $2,000. College became my battleground for independence. I was determined to prove that I didn't need their money or their approval. I enrolled at Portland State University with my partial scholarship covering tuition, but I still had to come up with rent, food, books, and all the other expenses that come with being a student. I took a job waiting tables at a busy downtown restaurant called The Cornerstone, working dinner shifts 4 nights a week. The hours were brutal, often getting home past midnight, and then waking up for 8 a.m. classes, but the tips were decent and I needed every cent. I also picked up a position as a patient care assistant at a nearby nursing home, working weekend shifts helping elderly residents with daily activities. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me hands-on experience that I knew would be valuable later. Most weeks I survived on about 5 hours of sleep a night. I would finish my shift at the restaurant, get home around 1 in the morning, study until 3, sleep until 7, then drag myself to campus for a full day of classes. My body ached constantly and I lived on cheap ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever leftover food I could sneak from the restaurant. I watched my classmates go out to bars, take spring break trips, and complain about their parents not sending enough money for new clothes. Meanwhile, I was calculating whether I could afford both my biology textbook and my electricity bill that month. I never complained though. Complaining felt like weakness, and I had learned early that weakness got you nowhere. During this time, Kevin was living it up at the University of Oregon in Eugene, a school my parents were paying for in full. He joined a fraternity, went to football games every weekend, and posted constant pictures on social media of parties, road trips, and expensive dinners out. He was failing half his classes, but my parents kept writing checks, convinced he just needed time to find himself. I remember one particularly painful moment when I came home for Thanksgiving my sophomore year, exhausted from working a double shift the night before. My parents spent the entire dinner talking about Kevin's fraternity formal, and how they had sent him $500 to rent a tuxedo and take his date to a nice dinner. When I mentioned that I had made the dean's list that semester, maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working 40 hours a week, my mother smiled vaguely and said, "That's nice, honey," then turned right back to discussing Kevin's social life. It was during my junior year that I met Marcus Jensen, and he became the first person who actually saw me for who I was. I was working an overnight shift at the nursing home when an elderly resident had a fall. We called 911 and Marcus was one of the paramedics who responded. I watched him work with such calm professionalism, talking gently to the frightened woman while efficiently assessing her injuries. After they transported her to the hospital, he came back to drop off some paperwork, and we started talking. He asked about my schedule, and when I explained I was in nursing school while working 2 jobs, he didn't look at me with pity or judgment. He just nodded and said, "That takes real strength. Most people couldn't handle that kind of grind." We started meeting for coffee between shifts, these brief stolen moments where I could actually relax and talk to someone who understood what it meant to work yourself to exhaustion for something you believed in. Marcus had grown up in a similar situation, putting himself through EMT training while supporting his younger siblings after his father walked out. He knew what it felt like to be invisible in your own family, to sacrifice everything while watching others coast by on handouts. Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding. He never once made me feel like I needed to be anything other than exactly who I was, tired and determined, and sometimes barely holding it together. With Marcus's encouragement, I kept pushing forward. I graduated from Portland State with my nursing degree, and immediately started working in the emergency room at Providence Medical Center. The ER was chaos, 12-hour shifts filled with trauma cases, heart attacks, overdoses, and every kind of medical emergency imaginable. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but I loved it. I was good at staying calm under pressure, at thinking quickly and acting decisively. Within 2 years, I was promoted to charge nurse, managing shift schedules and mentoring new nurses. My salary jumped to $72,000 a year, more money than I had ever imagined making. I bought myself a small 1-bedroom condo in downtown Portland when I was 27, a modest place but entirely mine. I furnished it piece by piece from thrift stores and clearance sales, and every single item in that space represented something I had earned. Around the same time, Kevin dropped out of college in his 5th year, still about 30 credits short of a degree. My parents were disappointed but not angry. "He just needs to find his path," my mother insisted. They let him move back home rent-free and got him a job through a friend working at a car dealership. He lasted 4 months before quitting because the hours were too early. At 29, I saw an opportunity that would change everything. The hospital administration was looking to improve efficiency in the ER, and I had been collecting data and observations for months about bottlenecks in patient flow and resource allocation. I put together a detailed proposal for streamlining processes, and when I presented it to the board, they were impressed enough to pilot my suggestions. The changes I implemented reduced average patient wait times by 30% and improved staff satisfaction scores significantly. The hospital offered me a position as a healthcare administrator with a salary of $95,000. I accepted the administrator position and threw myself into the work with the same intensity one had brought to everything else in my life. The role was demanding, requiring me to balance patient care quality with budget constraints, staff management with regulatory compliance, and innovation with practical implementation. I spent long hours analyzing hospital data, attending board meetings, and developing new protocols. The work energized me in a way that pure clinical nursing never quite had. I loved the challenge of seeing the big picture, of finding solutions that could help hundreds of patients instead of just the ones who came through my shift. Within a year of taking the administrative role, I noticed patterns across multiple hospitals in the Portland area. They were all struggling with similar issues related to emergency department efficiency, staff burnout, and patient satisfaction scores. I started having conversations with Jennifer Park, a former colleague who had left bedside nursing to pursue healthcare consulting. Jennifer and I had worked together in the Providence ER for 3 years, and she was one of the sharpest clinical minds I had ever encountered. She had a gift for identifying systemic problems and designing elegant solutions. Over coffee one rainy Saturday morning at a cafe near Powell's Books, we started sketching out ideas on napkins. What if we could package the protocols and systems I had developed at Providence and offer them to other hospitals as a consulting service? Jennifer had the business acumen and marketing skills, while I had the clinical expertise and proven track record of results. We spent the next 6 months developing a business plan, working nights and weekends while maintaining our day jobs. We researched the market, identified potential clients, and refined our service offerings. By the time I turned 30, we were ready to launch Mitchell Park Healthcare Solutions, a consulting firm specializing in emergency department optimization. We started small, taking on a contract with a struggling hospital in Gresham. Their ER wait times were among the worst in the state, averaging over 4 hours, and patient complaints were mounting. Jennifer and I spent 3 months embedded in their facility, observing workflows, interviewing staff, and analyzing every aspect of their operations. We implemented a series of changes ranging from revised triage protocols to adjusted staffing schedules to improved communication systems between departments. Within 6 months, their average wait time dropped to 90 minutes and patient satisfaction scores jumped 23 points. The hospital administrator was thrilled and became our first enthusiastic reference. Word spread quickly in the relatively small Portland healthcare community. We landed contracts with 2 more hospitals, then a small regional medical center outside Salem. I continued working part-time at Providence to maintain my clinical skills and credibility, but the consulting business was growing faster than we had anticipated. By the time I was 31, Mitchell Park Healthcare Solutions had 7 employees and annual revenue approaching $800,000. My personal income from the business, combined with my part-time hospital salary, put me well over $150,000 a year. I had money in savings, investments in a retirement account, and for the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. During these years of building my career and business, my relationship with my family remained distant and surface level. I would show up for major holidays, exchange pleasantries, and leave as quickly as was socially acceptable. My parents seemed mildly aware that I was doing well professionally, but they never asked for details and I never volunteered them. Kevin, meanwhile, was drifting through his late 20s with no clear direction. He had worked a series of short-term jobs, each one ending after a few months due to conflicts with managers, early morning schedules he couldn't handle, or simply losing interest. My parents continued to support him financially, paying his rent on a 1-bedroom apartment in Beaverton, and supplementing his income when he was between jobs. He had been dating Amanda Torres for about 2 years, a relationship that seemed to mostly involve the two of them going out to bars, attending concerts, and taking weekend trips funded by my parents' credit cards. Amanda worked sporadically as a server but seemed content to let Kevin, and by extension my parents, cover most of their expenses. I tried not to judge, tried to tell myself that their choices were not my concern. But watching the pattern continue into adulthood stirred the same frustrations I had felt as a teenager watching Kevin get everything while I got nothing. The turning point came when I was 31 and decided to invite my family to tour our new office space. Jennifer and I had just signed a lease on a proper office in the Pearl District, a renovated warehouse building with exposed brick, high ceilings, and large windows overlooking the Willamette River. It was a significant upgrade from the spare bedroom in Jennifer's house where we had been working, and it felt like a concrete symbol of how far we had come. I was proud of what we had built and thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that finally made my parents see me as something other than the responsible daughter who took care of herself. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon. My father, my mother, Kevin, and Amanda all crowded into our reception area looking around with wide eyes. I gave them a tour, showing them the conference room where we met with clients, the workstations where our staff analyzed hospital data, the wall covered with letters of recommendation and success stories from facilities we had helped. Jennifer joined us, professionally explaining our business model and recent growth. My parents nodded along, making appropriate sounds of approval. Kevin looked bored, scrolling through his phone while I talked about our expansion plans. Then came the questions, and the tone shifted in a way that made my stomach tighten with familiar unease. My father asked how much the business was worth, what our annual revenue looked like, whether we were planning to sell or bring on investors. My mother wanted to know about my personal income, how much I was making now compared to when I was just a nurse. The questions felt invasive, too specific, too focused on numbers rather than the actual work we were doing. When I deflected, giving vague answers about doing well and being comfortable, my mother pressed harder. "You must be making really good money now," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "It must be nice to finally be able to help out your family after all these years." The comment landed like a punch to the gut. After all these years. As if I had been the one receiving help. As if I had not spent my entire life struggling on my own while they poured money into Kevin's every whim. I forced a smile and changed the subject, but the damage was done. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the wheels turning as they assessed what they could get from me. Kevin chimed in, suggesting that since I was doing so well, maybe I could help him and Amanda get into a nicer place. Their current apartment was too small, and the neighborhood was not great. Surely I could help with a down payment or co-sign a lease for them. I made non-committal noises and wrapped up the tour as quickly as possible. After they left, I sat in my office feeling sick. Jennifer came in and sat across from me, her expression concerned. "They were scoping you out," she said quietly. "I have seen that look before. They are figuring out how to get a piece of what you have built." I knew she was right, but I did not want to believe it. These were my parents, my family. Surely they were just proud and curious, not calculating and greedy. But the feeling would not go away, that sense of being evaluated like a resource to be mined rather than a daughter to be celebrated. A few weeks later, my Uncle Tom called me. Uncle Tom was my father's older brother, a retired firefighter who had always been kind to me in a gruff, no-nonsense way. He had noticed the favoritism growing up, had occasionally called my parents out on it, but mostly stayed out of family drama. His call caught me off guard. "Victoria," he said without preamble, "I need to tell you something and you are not going to like it. Your parents are in serious financial trouble." I felt my blood run cold. He explained that he had been helping my father with some paperwork and discovered they had racked up over $70,000 in credit card debt. The debt had accumulated over years of funding Kevin's lifestyle, from his college expenses to his current living situation to constant bailouts when he was between jobs. But it got worse. Uncle Tom had overheard a conversation between my parents where they were discussing their plan to move in with me. They figured I had plenty of space in my downtown condo, and that I could support them while they got back on their feet financially. They were planning to sell their house, which had some equity, but instead of using that money to pay down their debt, they wanted to hold on to it as a nest egg while living rent-free with me and having me cover their daily expenses. The audacity of it took my breath away. They had spent decades prioritizing Kevin, going into debt to fund his failure to launch, and now they expected me to bail them out while they continued supporting him. Uncle Tom's voice was tight with anger. "They think you owe them," he said. Your mother was saying something about how you have been selfish your whole life. And now you can finally contribute to the family. I wanted you to know what they are planning before they ambush you with it." I thanked him, my mind already racing. This was not going to be a simple request I could decline. This was going to be a full-scale campaign, with guilt trips and emotional manipulation, and probably public pressure from extended family, who had no idea what the real dynamics were. The next day, I sat at my desk unable to concentrate on work. I kept replaying every conversation with my parents, every dismissive comment, every time they had chosen Kevin over me. The anger I had been suppressing for years bubbled up hot and fierce. I thought about the nursing program I had given up, the scholarships I had lost, the countless hours I had worked while exhausted and alone. I thought about Kevin's truck, his ski trips, his fraternity formal, all funded by parents who told me money did not grow on trees when I needed $89 for an exam fee. The injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm me. That evening, Marcus came over and found me pacing my condo, too agitated to sit still. I told him everything Uncle Tom had said, and Marcus listened with the calm focus he brought to every crisis. When I finished, he took my hands and looked me straight in the eye. "You know they are going to come at you hard," he said. "They have been conditioning you your whole life to be the responsible one, the one who sacrifices. You need to be ready to set boundaries and stick to them no matter what they throw at you." His words steadied me. He was right. This was not the time to hope for the best or give them the benefit of the doubt. This was the time to protect what I had built. I called Patrick O'Brien, an attorney who specialized in asset protection and family law. Patrick had been recommended by a colleague who had gone through a messy divorce and needed to shield her business assets. I met with him in his office overlooking the Willamette River, and I laid out the situation in clinical detail. I explained my business ownership, my personal assets, my parents' financial troubles, and their apparent plan to move in with me and expect financial support. Patrick listened carefully, taking notes, and when I finished he leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "The first thing we need to do is make sure your business assets are protected," he said. "Right now, you own 50% of Mitchell Park Healthcare Solutions along with your partner Jennifer. If your parents were to move in with you and establish residency, and if they were to later claim you had made verbal promises of support, things could get complicated, especially if they are in debt and creditors come after them. We need to create clear legal separation between your personal assets and anything they might try to claim." He walked me through several options, explaining the pros and cons of each approach. We decided on a multi-layered strategy. First, I would transfer my condo into an LLC, creating a legal entity that owned the property rather than me personally owning it. This would make it much harder for anyone to claim rights to the property or force me to provide housing. Second, I would formalize my business ownership structure with updated operating agreements that clearly defined ownership stakes and decision-making power, protecting the business from any external claims. Third, I would document all my assets, create a paper trail showing they were acquired through my own work with no financial contribution from my parents, establishing that they had no legitimate claim to any of it. The process took several weeks and cost me about $12,000 in legal fees, but it was worth every penny for the peace of mind it brought. Patrick also advised me to start documenting any conversations with my parents about money or living situations, keeping records that could be used later if things got ugly. I felt like I was preparing for war, and in a way, I was. I was going to war with the people who were supposed to love and support me, but had instead spent 32 years using me as their backup plan, while investing everything in my brother. During this time, I also had several long conversations with Jennifer about the business. I told her what was happening with my family, and my concerns that they might try to interfere with or make claims on the company. Jennifer was furious on my behalf. She had met my parents once and had found them pleasant enough, but hearing the full history made her see them in a different light. "We are partners," she said firmly. 50-50. Your family has no claim to this business and they never will. If they try anything, they will have to go through both of us and our attorney. Her solidarity meant everything to me. In my family, I had always been alone, always been the one fighting for scraps of attention and resources. But in my professional life, I had built something different. I had found people who valued me, who saw my worth, who stood beside me as equals. Jennifer, Marcus, Uncle Tom, even Patrick the attorney in his professional capacity. These people formed a support network that my biological family had never provided. I drew strength from that, from knowing I was not facing this alone. As the legal protections fell into place, I felt my resolve hardening. I was not going to let my parents move into my home. I was not going to fund their retirement while they continued supporting Kevin. I was not going to sacrifice one more thing for people who had never sacrificed anything for me. The guilt they would try to weaponize, the family obligation they would invoke, none of it was going to work this time. I had spent too many years building this life to let them take it from me now. About a month after my conversation with Uncle Tom, I started noticing signs that the campaign was beginning. My mother called me more frequently than usual, always starting with innocuous questions about my week before steering the conversation toward how expensive everything was getting, how hard it was for them to make ends meet on my father's pension, how they were worried about their future. She never quite came out and asked for help directly, but the implications were clear. She was softening me up, testing my responses, laying groundwork for a bigger ask. Kevin texted me out of the blue, something he almost never did, asking if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up. When I agreed, more out of curiosity than any real desire to spend time with him, he spent the entire hour talking about how stressed our parents were, how they had done so much for both of us over the years, how family needed to stick together. It was so obviously scripted that I almost laughed. He had never cared about family sticking together when he was taking my babysitting money, or when our parents were skipping my graduation for his baseball game. But now that there was money to be had, suddenly family was important. The final warning came from Aunt Lisa, my mother's sister, who called to tell me she had heard I was doing really well with my business. And wasn't it wonderful that I could finally help out my parents who had worked so hard to raise me? The narrative was being spread through the extended family, painting me as the successful daughter who had finally made it, and could now give back to the struggling parents who had supported her. The revisionist history was breathtaking. They were rewriting decades of neglect and favoritism into a story of parental sacrifice and filial duty. I knew the confrontation was coming. I could feel it building like a storm on the horizon. They were going to make their move soon, probably at some family gathering where they could maximize the social pressure and guilt. I needed to be ready, needed to have my boundaries clear and my resolve unshakable. So I spent time mentally preparing, rehearsing what I would say, reminding myself of every slight and every sacrifice and every time they had chosen Kevin over me. I built up my anger like armor, because I knew I was going to need it to withstand what was coming. Marcus helped me practice. We would sit in my condo in the evenings and he would play the role of my parents, throwing out guilt trips and manipulation tactics. You are being selfish. After all we have done for you. Family takes care of family. We sacrificed so much when you were young. Your brother needs help and you are the only one who can provide it. We are getting older, and we need you. Each practiced response made me stronger, more confident in my ability to hold the line. Marcus never let me waver, never let me slip into old patterns of accommodating and appeasing. You do not owe them anything, he would say after each practice session. You have already given them more than they ever gave you. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. My mother, her voice bright and cheerful, inviting me to a family dinner that Saturday at the Riverside Grill, a nice restaurant on the Willamette River. Nothing special, she said, just wanting to get everyone together. I knew immediately this was it. This was when they would make their move. I accepted the invitation calmly, already planning my response. I called Patrick O'Brien and confirmed that all my legal protections were in place. I called Jennifer and gave her a heads up that family drama was about to explode, and it might affect me emotionally for a few days. I called Uncle Tom and told him it was happening. He wished me strength and made me promise to call him after, no matter how late. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland spring weather. I dressed carefully in professional but comfortable clothes, wanting to project confidence without looking like I was trying too hard. Marcus offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. Needed to prove to myself that I could stand up to them without backup. He understood, kissing me and telling me he would be waiting at my place when I got back, ready to listen or just sit with me in silence, whatever I needed. I arrived at the Riverside Grill exactly on time. The restaurant was moderately upscale, the kind of place my parents would choose to impress me with their sophistication, while also making it awkward for me to cause a scene. I spotted them at a large corner table with a view of the river. My father sat at the head, looking stern and authoritative. My mother was beside him, already wearing her martyred expression. Kevin and Amanda sat across from them, Kevin looking uncomfortable and Amanda examining her manicure with apparent boredom. Uncle Tom sat at the far end of the table, and when he caught my eye, he gave me a small nod of solidarity. The dinner started pleasantly enough, with small talk about the weather, the food, mundane topics that meant nothing. I could feel the tension underneath, everyone waiting for the real conversation to begin. It came during the main course. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision, cleared his throat, and looked at me with an expression that was probably meant to be fatherly, but came across as patronizing. "Victoria," he began, his voice taking on a formal tone. "Your mother and I have been discussing our future, and we have made a decision that involves you." I kept my expression neutral, my fork steady in my hand. My mother jumped in, her voice trembling slightly with what I assumed was practiced emotion. "We are struggling financially," she said. "Things have been very difficult, and we have decided we need to make some changes. Your father and I are planning to sell the house, and we need a place to stay while we figure out our next steps. You have that lovely condo downtown with plenty of space, and we thought it would be perfect for us to move in with you. Just temporarily, of course, until we get back on our feet." The words hung in the air. Temporarily. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. There was nothing temporary about their plan. They wanted to move into my home, stop paying rent, and have me support them indefinitely while they continued funneling money to Kevin. I took a slow breath, meeting my father's eyes. "That is an interesting proposal," I said calmly. "But I should let you know that I sold my condo 3 weeks ago." The table went silent. My mother's mouth actually dropped open. My father's eyes narrowed in confusion. Kevin looked up from his plate, suddenly paying attention. Only Uncle Tom remained unsurprised, having been informed of my legal maneuvers ahead of time. I continued speaking, my voice steady and clear. "I transferred the property into an LLC for asset protection purposes, as part of restructuring my business holdings. The condo is now owned by a legal entity, not by me personally, and that entity has a board of directors who would need to approve any residents. I cannot simply invite people to move in." My father recovered first, his confusion shifting to anger. "What are you talking about? You cannot just sell your home without telling your family. That does not make any sense." I smiled politely. "Actually, I can do whatever I want with my property. It is mine. I purchased it with my money, and I made a business decision to restructure my assets for legal protection. It is a common practice for small business owners." My mother's eyes filled with tears, right on cue. "How could you do this? After everything we have done for you, all the sacrifices we made raising you, and you cannot even help us when we need you? This is so selfish, Victoria." I felt the old guilt trying to rise up, the conditioned response to my mother's tears and disappointment. But I pushed it down, remembering every time they had dismissed my needs, every dollar they had spent on Kevin while telling me to figure it out myself. I set down my fork and looked at both of them with an expression I hoped conveyed every ounce of the anger and hurt I had been carrying for decades. "Sacrifices?" I said, my voice quiet but sharp. "What sacrifices? You sent Kevin to private school while I went to public school. You bought him a truck while I took the bus. You paid for his college in full while I worked 2 jobs and went into debt for mine. You gave me $20 for my 16th birthday and gave him a vehicle. You funded his baseball camps and ski trips and told me money did not grow on trees when I needed help with an exam fee. You made me give up my dream nursing program to help pay for your bills, and 1 week later you bought Kevin a $1,500 mountain bike. So please, tell me more about these sacrifices you made for me, because I must have missed them." The words came out in a rush, years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. My mother recoiled as if I had slapped her. My father's face turned red with anger. "You ungrateful," he started, but I cut him off. "I am not ungrateful. I am realistic. You spent my entire childhood investing everything in Kevin while expecting me to manage on my own. Now you are in debt, because you continued that pattern into his adulthood, and you think I should bail you out. I will not do it. I have worked too hard for too long to let you drain me the way you have drained yourselves for him. Kevin finally spoke up, his voice defensive and whiny. You have always been jealous of me. You cannot stand that Mom and Dad care about me. This is not about jealousy, I said, turning to face him. This is about consequences. You have never had to face consequences for your choices, because they always caught you when you fell. Well, I am not going to catch them. They made their choices. They can live with them. Amanda, who had been silent until now, scoffed. You are such a bitch. You have all this money and you will not even help your own parents. You think you are better than everyone. I looked at her with genuine curiosity. And who are you exactly? You have been dating my brother for 2 years, contributing nothing while my parents fund your lifestyle too. You have no standing in this conversation at all. She opened her mouth to respond but apparently could not think of anything to say, so she just glared at me instead. My father tried to regain control of the situation. This is not a negotiation, Victoria. We are your parents. We are telling you that we are moving in with you tomorrow. You will make this work. The sheer entitlement of it took my breath away. I shook my head slowly. No, you are not. As I explained, the property is no longer mine to offer. But even if it were, the answer would still be no. You taught me to be independent, to figure things out on my own, to manage with what I had. Congratulations. I learned those lessons very well. Now you can learn them too. My mother was crying openly now, her mascara running down her face. You are turning your back on your family. How can you be so cruel? I stood up, gathering my purse. I am not being cruel. I am setting boundaries. There is a difference, although I understand you have never recognized one before. I hope you figure out your financial situation. I genuinely do. But it will not be with my money or my home. I looked at Uncle Tom. It was good to see you. Thank you for coming. He gave me a small smile and a nod of approval. I turned to leave, but my father was not done. If you walk out of here, he said, his voice cold and threatening, I will make sure everyone in this family knows what kind of daughter you really are. I will tell everyone how you refused to help your own parents when they needed you. You will be ostracized. No one will want anything to do with you. I paused, looking back at him. Then I guess you had better start making those calls. But make sure you tell them the whole story. Tell them about the nursing program I gave up. Tell them about Kevin's truck and his college fund, and all the money you spent on him while I worked my way through school. Tell them about the $70,000 in debt you racked up funding his lifestyle. Tell them everything, and let them judge for themselves. I walked out of the Riverside Grill with my head high, my hands shaking but my resolve intact. Behind me, I could hear my mother sobbing and my father's angry voice, but I did not look back. I got in my car, drove 3 blocks, pulled into a parking lot, and sat there crying for 20 minutes. The tears were not regret. They were release. I had finally said everything I had been holding in for 32 years, and while it hurt, it also felt like freedom. I drove straight to my condo, where Marcus was waiting as promised. The moment I walked through the door, he took one look at my tear-stained face, and pulled me into his arms without saying a word. I collapsed against him, letting out all the emotion I had been holding back during the confrontation. He guided me to the couch, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and just sat with me while I cried. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I told him everything that had happened at dinner. Every accusation, every guilt trip, every threat. Marcus listened without interrupting, his hand rubbing slow circles on my back. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. You did the right thing, he said firmly. I know it does not feel good right now, but you protected yourself. You stood up for yourself. That takes incredible courage, especially against people who have spent your entire life conditioning you to put them first. His words helped, but I still felt raw and exposed. Part of me wondered if I had been too harsh, too cold. Maybe I should have offered some kind of compromise, some middle ground that would have kept the peace. Marcus seemed to read my thoughts. Do not second-guess yourself, he said. There is no middle ground with people like that. Any concession you made would just be the beginning. They would take and take until there was nothing left of you. I knew he was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. I spent that night tossing and turning, replaying the dinner conversation in my mind, hearing my mother's sobs and my father's threats on an endless loop. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I had drawn my line, and now I had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Those consequences started manifesting almost immediately. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was blowing up with texts and calls from extended family members. Cousins I had not spoken to in years, aunts and uncles who barely knew me. Even my grandmother who lived in assisted living and rarely called anyone. The messages varied in tone, but the content was remarkably consistent. How could you abandon your parents in their time of need? Family is supposed to help each other. Your parents sacrificed so much for you, and this is how you repay them? You should be ashamed of yourself. It was clear that my father had made good on his threat to spread his version of the story throughout the family. In his narrative, I was the ungrateful daughter who had become too successful and too proud to help her struggling parents. There was no mention of Kevin, no acknowledgement of the decades of favoritism, no context about why I had refused. Just a simple story of parental need met with daughterly cruelty. I felt my anger rising as I read message after message, each one assuming they knew the full story when they only knew the carefully edited version my parents had provided. I drafted several responses, detailed explanations of the real history, rebuttals that laid out every instance of favoritism and neglect. But before I sent any of them, I called Uncle Tom. He answered on the second ring, his gruff voice immediately calming. I knew they would do this, he said when I told him about the messages. Your father has been working the phone all day, calling everyone and painting himself as the victim. It is what narcissists do when they do not get their way. They rewrite reality and recruit others to their version of events. Uncle Tom advised me not to engage. The people who matter already know the truth, he said. The ones who are calling you without asking for your side of the story. They have already chosen to believe your parents. Nothing you say will change their minds, and trying will just drain your energy. Focus on the people who actually support you, and let the rest think whatever they want. It was good advice, hard to follow but good. I ended up blocking most of the numbers, and deleting the messages unread. The few family members I actually cared about, like Uncle Tom and a couple of cousins who had reached out privately to check on me rather than judge me, I responded to with brief explanations. The rest I let go. Monday morning brought a new level of chaos. I was at the office, trying to focus on a proposal for a new hospital client, when our receptionist buzzed me. Your parents are here, she said, her voice uncertain. They are demanding to see you. My stomach dropped. I walked out to the reception area to find my father and mother standing there, both looking agitated and determined. Several of my employees were watching with obvious curiosity, work forgotten as they observed the unfolding drama. I kept my voice calm and professional. This is not an appropriate place for a family discussion. You need to leave. My father stepped forward, his face red with anger. We are not leaving until you agree to do the right thing. You are going to help us, Victoria. You owe us that much. The entitlement in his voice, the absolute certainty that he had the right to demand things from me in my own workplace, made my blood boil. I do not owe you anything, I said quietly. And you are trespassing. If you do not leave immediately, I will call security. My mother started crying again, louder this time, clearly playing to the audience of my coworkers. Please, Victoria, she wailed. We are your parents. We are desperate. How can you be so heartless? I felt every eye in the office on me, felt the weight of their judgment even though they had no idea what was really happening. I pulled out my phone and dialed building security. Yes, I have 2 individuals in my office who are refusing to leave after being asked. Suite 304. Thank you. My father's expression turned ugly. You are really going to call security on your own parents? What kind of person are you? The kind who sets boundaries, I replied evenly. The kind who does not let family dysfunction interfere with her professional life. The kind you raised me to be, actually. You taught me to be independent and handle my own problems. Well, this is me handling mine. Security arrived within 3 minutes, Two large men in uniform who asked my parents firmly but politely to leave the building. My mother continued her performance, sobbing about her cruel daughter as they escorted her out. My father shot me one last venomous look. "You will regret this," he said. "We will make sure of it." Then they were gone, and I was left standing in reception with a dozen co-workers staring at me with a mixture of sympathy, confusion, and discomfort. I turned to address the room, keeping my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. "I apologize for that disruption. It was a personal family matter that will not happen again. Please return to your work." I walked back to my office, closed the door, and sat down at my desk with shaking hands. Jennifer appeared moments later, closing the door behind her and sitting across from me with a concerned expression. "Are you okay?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not really. But I will be." She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "For what it is worth, I have met your parents. I know what they are like. Anyone here with half a brain could tell they were trying to manipulate you. You handled it perfectly." Her support meant more than I could express. I nodded, blinking back tears, and forced myself to focus on work for the rest of the day. That evening, I met with Patrick O'Brien again to discuss my options. The confrontations were escalating, and I wanted to know what legal protections I had. Patrick listened to my account of the office incident and made notes. "We can get a restraining order if they continue to harass you at work," he said. "It sounds like they are engaging in a pattern of harassment, intended to coerce you into giving them money or housing. That is not legal, even for family members." We discussed the possibility of a cease and desist letter as a first step, a formal legal document demanding they stop contacting me and showing up at my workplace. I was hesitant to take such an aggressive legal step against my own parents, but Patrick was firm. "They have already shown they will not respect normal boundaries," he said. "A legal document makes it clear there will be consequences if they continue. Sometimes that is the only language people like this understand." I authorized him to draft the letter, feeling sick about it but knowing it was necessary. The next few days were relatively quiet, which made me nervous rather than relieved. I knew my parents were not going to simply give up and go away. They were regrouping, planning their next move. The calm before the storm. Marcus stayed at my place most nights that week, his presence a comfort even though we both knew he could not protect me from the emotional manipulation that was surely coming. On Thursday, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. A woman's voice, professional and slightly uncomfortable, introduced herself as a reporter from the Oregonian, Portland's main newspaper. "I am calling about a story that was brought to our attention regarding you and your parents," she said. "I was wondering if you would like to comment." My heart sank. "What kind of story?" I asked carefully. The reporter explained that my parents had reached out to them with a story about an ungrateful daughter who was refusing to help her elderly parents despite having significant wealth. They had apparently painted a picture of themselves as destitute and abandoned, victims of a successful child who had forgotten where she came from. The reporter, to her credit, seemed skeptical and was reaching out to me for my side before running anything. This sounded like the kind of human interest piece that could go viral, depending on how it was framed. I took a deep breath and made a decision. "I would like to meet with you in person to discuss this," I said. "There is significantly more context to this situation than my parents have provided, and I think you deserve to have the full story before you decide whether to publish anything." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next morning. I spent that evening preparing, gathering documents that proved my financial independence, reference letters from colleagues and mentors, even my old bank statements from college showing how I had supported myself. The meeting with the reporter, whose name was Elizabeth Chun, lasted over 2 hours. I laid out the entire history, backing up every claim with documentation. The college expenses I had paid myself. The scholarship I had given up. The pattern of favoritism that had persisted my entire life. The $70,000 in debt my parents had accumulated supporting my brother. My ownership and building of a successful business through my own work. Elizabeth took detailed notes, asking clarifying questions, and occasionally shaking her head in apparent disbelief. "I do not want this to become a public spectacle," I told her honestly. But I also will not let my parents publicly destroy my reputation with a false narrative. If you are going to run a story, it needs to include the full context. Elizabeth closed her notebook and looked at me thoughtfully. Honestly, this does not sound like the kind of story we would run, she said. It is a family dispute, not a matter of public interest. Your parents essentially tried to use the newspaper to pressure you into giving them money, which is not something we want to enable. But I appreciate you taking the time to tell me your side. It helps me understand why this is not a story we should touch. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you for actually investigating before running with their version, I said. She smiled sympathetically. Part of the job is recognizing when someone is trying to manipulate the media for personal gain. Your parents are not the first to try it, and they will not be the last. We shook hands and parted ways. And I felt like I had dodged a major bullet. If that story had run with my parents' framing, the damage to my personal and professional reputation could have been devastating. That weekend, Marcus convinced me to get out of Portland for a couple of days. We drove out to the Oregon coast, staying in a small bed and breakfast in Cannon Beach. Walking along the beach, watching the waves crash against Haystack Rock, I felt some of the tension start to drain from my shoulders. Marcus held my hand, and we talked about everything. Except my family. We made plans for the future, discussed possibly moving in together officially, dreamed about what our life could look like once this nightmare was behind us. On Sunday evening, as we drove back to Portland, my phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Tom. Call me when you can. It is important. I waited until we were back at my place before calling him back. He answered immediately. Your parents sold the house, he said without preamble. They closed on it Friday. I felt my stomach twist. That was fast. Where are they planning to go? Uncle Tom sighed heavily. They moved into Kevin's apartment. All three of them are crammed into his one-bedroom place. Kevin is sleeping on the couch, and your parents have his bedroom. It is a disaster from what I hear. Lots of fighting already. The image would have been comical if it were not so pathetic. My parents, who had been planning to move into my spacious downtown condo, were instead squeezed into Kevin's cramped apartment in Beaverton. The natural consequence of their choices was playing out in real time. They are still blaming you for everything, Uncle Tom continued. Your mother is telling anyone who will listen that you forced them into this situation. But I will say more people are starting to ask questions. A few family members have reached out to me asking for the real story, and when I tell them about the years of favoritism and how they spent themselves into debt supporting Kevin, the tone changes. People are not as sympathetic to your parents as they were at first. That was something, at least. The truth was slowly spreading to counter my parents' narrative. I thanked Uncle Tom for keeping me informed and for being honest with other family members about the real dynamics. After hanging up, I told Marcus what was happening. He shook his head. They made their bed, he said simply. Now they get to lie in it. It was harsh but accurate. They had chosen Kevin over me for decades. Now they got to live with Kevin and experience firsthand the result of their enabling parenting. Over the next month, I heard occasional updates through Uncle Tom. Kevin had lost another job after showing up late too many times. My parents were dipping into the proceeds from their house sale to cover all three of their living expenses. Amanda had moved out after constant fights with my mother about household chores and expenses. The cramped living situation was creating exactly the kind of friction and resentment you would expect when three adults with dysfunctional relationship patterns tried to share a tiny apartment. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward in positive ways. Jennifer and I landed our biggest contract yet, a multi-year consulting agreement with a hospital network in Eastern Oregon worth over $500,000. We hired 3 new employees and moved into a larger office space. My personal income from the business climbed past $200,000 a year. Marcus and I decided to look for a house together, something with space for the future family we both wanted. We found a beautiful craftsman-style home in Lake Oswego with a large backyard and plenty of room to grow. I was building the life I had always wanted, surrounded by people who valued and supported me. The contrast between my trajectory and my family's downward spiral was stark, and while I took no pleasure in their struggles, I felt no guilt either. They had created their own situation through decades of poor choices and misplaced priorities. I had simply refused to let them drag me down with them. The cease and desist letter that Patrick had drafted was never sent. After the failed attempt to use the media and the reality of their new living situation set in, my parents stopped trying to contact me directly. The harassment ceased, and an uneasy peace settled over the situation. I knew they still resented me, still blamed me for their predicament, but they had apparently realized that continuing to pursue me was futile. I had erected boundaries they could not breach, and eventually they had no choice but to accept that. 3 months after the confrontation at the Riverside Grill, I was settling into my new normal. Work was thriving, my relationship with Marcus was stronger than ever, and I had finally found peace with my decision to cut off my parents' access to me and my resources. I still had moments of doubt, still occasionally wondered if I had been too harsh, but those moments were becoming less frequent. I was learning to trust my own judgment, and to prioritize my own well-being over the dysfunctional family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. Uncle Tom remained my only real connection to my family of origin, and even that was limited. He would call every few weeks with updates, making sure I knew what was happening without pressuring me to change my stance. His support never wavered, and I was grateful to have at least one blood relative who understood and validated my choices. The rest of the family, those who had condemned me based on my parents' lies, faded into irrelevance. I realized I did not need their approval or understanding. I had built my own family through choice rather than obligation, and that family was healthier and more supportive than the one I had been born into. As spring turned to summer, Marcus and I moved into our new house in Lake Oswego. We spent weekends painting walls, planting a garden, and making the space truly ours. Jennifer came over for dinner parties where we celebrated our business successes and made plans for continued growth. Uncle Tom visited occasionally, admiring what we had built and always reinforcing that I had made the right choice. This was my life now, free from the weight of family obligation that had burdened me for so long. The scars of those years were still there. I still felt a pang when I saw families who genuinely supported each other, still struggled with feelings of not being good enough that had been ingrained in me from childhood. But I was learning to recognize those feelings for what they were, remnants of an old story that no longer defined me. I was writing a new story now, one where I was valued and respected, where my hard work was acknowledged, where boundaries were honored. Looking back on the confrontation at the Riverside Grill, I could see it as a turning point. It was the moment I finally stopped hoping my parents would change, stopped seeking their approval, and fully claimed my right to protect what I had built. It was painful and ugly and left relationships damaged beyond repair, but it was also necessary. Sometimes love means setting people free to face the consequences of their own choices, even when those people are your parents. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive patterns, even if that refusal looks like abandonment to outside observers. I was learning that I could not control how others perceived my choices. My parents would always see me as the ungrateful daughter who turned her back on them. Extended family who believed their version would always think poorly of me. But the people who mattered, the ones who took the time to understand the full story, they saw the truth. They saw a woman who had overcome enormous obstacles, who had built something meaningful despite receiving no support, and who had finally found the courage to say enough. Up next, you have got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you will not want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.